are to be brought forth and elected. District conference. Like the quarter, it's set, called, and presided over by the presiding elder of the district. Again, a pastor or another elder can fill in when necessary. It examines the temporal and spiritual affairs of the district's churches, schools, and benevolent societies within that district. A lot of our African work have elementary and secondary schools within the district. Some of our local churches across the country have schools. So that's where all of their information comes, is to the district conference. You hear reports from everybody, from the presiding elder, the pastor, the clergy, everybody. Sometimes it's the same report you heard at the quarter. At the last quarter, it gets brought to the district conference and keeps going on the way up. It's where we examine and recommend clergy for licensure from the district, and to recommend clergy and to the local preachers and the exhorter officers into the annual conference. Really the local preacher, not the exhorter. But it's where we get to bring them into the next step of the traveling ministry. You get what I'm saying? Questions? Thoughts? It's also where the district conference also receives offerings and assessments towards its work. So whatever it's doing to help further and strengthen the district, it can raise offering and bring money in. Annual conference is called and presided over by the bishop, who is appointed over the conference. Another elder, including another bishop, can fill in when necessary. So with the recent passing of Bishop Hines, one of either the remaining 11 or one of the retirees is going to take on her work until we get to the next general conference in 2024. So they'll either divide her work up and give it to 2 or 3 bishops, probably the last 2 elected, so that's Bishop Thompson and Bishop Leake, because they're the youngest 2, and give them a little more to do. Or they'll take one of the retirees, more than likely, and give him the work for her to do. Yeah, and so there's a folk tale, I'll call it, behind why this happens. Between the 88 and the 1992 General Conference, one of our bishops died, Bishop Fisher. And Bishop Fisher's work was given to one of the retirees. There were multiple retirees. And Bishop Hilliard, who dedicated this church, was one of the retirees who didn't get any of the work. Bishop Fogey got all the work. So at the next meeting, Bishop Hilliard supposedly says, y'all just skipped over me and didn't give me an annual conference and didn't have me. I've been coming to meetings, I've been retired, I'm still coming to stuff, and y'all just leave me out? That's it. I'm not coming no more. Bishop Hilliard lived to be about 102, 103, so maybe not going to general meeting, let me not say that on tape. But it made them reassess it and say, well, if we're not going to divide it right among the retirees, let's just take those who are active and split it up. So for the last 25, 30 years, that's what they've done, is that when one has died or has become incapacitated, they've taken the bottom 2 or 3 men and divided, or women, because Bishop Hines, when Bishop Holmes died, Bishop Hines wound up with New England and the Bahamas, because she was one of the newer bishops, one of the junior bishops. So they broke the work up among 2 or 3 of them, and gave her some of the work and gave Bishop Proctor another piece of the work. So yes, the ones who are stuck with some of the more challenging places get some more stuff hopped on top of them. When Africa was not served by an indigenous bishop, they would be the ones to get the majority of the work. So you add an extra on top of somebody at that point who was trying. I didn't do it. If it had been me, you'd have stuck with a way to give it to the retirees. But it wasn't me. The annual conference is also where you hear reports from the same set of people. Like I said, it's probably the same report coming from the district conference on up. And honestly, it actually is on a certain technical level. One of the reasons they're pushing for this digital notebook that they're trying to push is because it's the same information going from one meeting to the other. So it's kind of like, well, just take all of the carrying of it out and it just transmits electronically from one to the other. The annual conference is also where we elect delegates to the quadrennial meetings for that year. So this year's quadrennial meeting is the Christian Ed Department. So at the annual conference, the Christian Ed Department may elect its delegates to that meeting if they haven't been appointed already. The General Conference delegates who are elected out of the annual conference are elected a year before. So the next General Conference is 2024. The delegates will be elected in 23. So next year, we'll elect delegates to the General Conference. And the annual conference examines and recommends clergy for licensure, raises funds for the work before it, and for the connectional budget. Here's charges brought to it against its members, including the bishops. The annual conference is also where they vote to sell property that is no longer in use. So if a church has been abandoned or is no longer has a congregation because it's been closed or the congregation has been moved, the property isn't sold by the local church or the expiring church. It's supposed to be sold by the annual conference. And then the money is supposed to come back to the annual conference. One day I'll tell you some stories I've heard about that and what happens, but we won't do that today. Where the bishop appoints and supplies churches and offices of the conference, including the district level. So this is where people get named to conference director of Christian Ed XYZ, conference director of missionaries, conference director, well, the lay is supposed to vote for their conference and district presidents at this meeting as well. But that's where the bishop will appoint, and it's also where the bishop appoints the pastor. Usually, it used to be, and I've noticed we've created a new trend. Used to be annual conference Sunday was when all of that happened. It's now happening annual conference Saturday, shrinking down by a day. The annual conference meets 4 times a year, typically 3 checkup meetings and an annual conference. Some areas do a 4th checkup meeting, yes? Or have they all finally gone to 3? So 3 checkup meetings and 1 annual conference. The General Conference is the supreme body of the Amy Zion Church. Ministerial and lay delegates are from each annual conference. So no matter how big, no matter how small, you have a delegate there from your annual conference. You might not have a whole lot of delegates because it's based on the assessment assigned to your area. So that means the more money you turn in, the more delegates you have. The less money you turn in, the smaller amount of delegates you have. But there is a minister and there's a lay. So for each one, there's one minister, 1 lay. So if you got 5 ministers, you got 5 lay. You also have alternates for each one. It meets every 4 years, and it meets for 7 days, starting with the 4th Wednesday of July. That date is actually the set date for the General Conference. There are 4 distinct general meetings that meet every year, with 1 meeting every 4 years. What does that mean? That means that the General Conference meets every 4 years, but the lay council meets the next year. I got a slide after that. I'll explain a little more. And then there's the Christian Ed Department. Then there's the missionaries. Then we come back to General Conference. It is the supreme appellate body of the denomination. It validates and receives newly established conferences into the denomination. It's where, as we recently saw, a bishop can be tried. It elects bishops and general officers and assigns them to their episcopal areas. It sets the connectional budget for the entire denomination. It creates and implements laws, we call them resolutions, for the denomination and the operation of the denomination. And it ratifies the creation and implementation of new arms of ministry. So, what does all of that mean? That means that the General Conference does a lot of legislative and administrative work for the entire denomination. That means that we elect our bishops, we elect our general officers, the budget gets approved and set at the General Conference. We put the laws, the discipline laws are put together there. And if you create a new ministry, so in the California Conference, we have something called SAGE. It's the senior ministry. It has to work its way to the General Conference to be ratified for it to then have to show up everywhere. It already did. They've already done that.
National Conference, so SAGE is denominational.
So SAGE is now denominational. Men of Zion was something else that had to go through that process. Yaakov had to go through that process. ACE had to go through that process. And we'll talk about how and why when we deal with the departments later. So yeah, General Conference does a lot. And they do it in 7 days. It was 10 when I was a kid. There's also the Board of Bishops and Connectional Council meetings. Both meetings meet once a year. The Board of Bishops meeting meets in mid-February and the Connectional Council in late July. The Connectional Council leads into whatever general meeting is coming up. It's where the Episcopal committees meet and transact business. So at the back of the discipline, there's a list of Episcopal committees that run from the connectional budget to the American Bible Society to worship and ritual to State of the Union. There's a whole lot of committees. There's got to be about 50 of them. They meet and have their time to turn in reports and present information. It's where the Board of Bishops meet to provide counsel for the general interest of the connection. So that means if something comes up for the denomination in the time between the General Conference, the general supervision of the denomination rests with the Board of Bishops.
Question.
Yes.
In order to be on the Episcopal committee, you have to be a delegate, right? Because don't they nominate the Episcopal committee at the General Conference?
My answer is going to be yes. I think the caveat to that, so our international work, based on how we interact with other countries, has the hardest time getting here, especially Africa. You have to apply for a visa to leave Africa to come into the United States. So regardless of who the delegate is, if they can't get a visa out, they can't get to the General Conference, or they can't get to the general meeting. So what happens is that the alternate delegates who are sent from the mainland get assigned any open seats in the African delegation. So if Pastor this time goes and he's an alternate, he could be assigned a seat. Potentially, he could be assigned a seat as a delegate for Western West Africa or for Eastern West Africa. When it comes time to put a committee together, since he's now a seated delegate for Western West Africa, he could be appointed to one of those committees. Okay? So, if it winds up that there's not enough delegates, sometimes you can appoint somebody, especially with the lay, you can appoint somebody onto the committee. Very rare, very infrequent, but for the most part, you're a delegate at the meeting. Does that answer your question? These are the quadrennial meetings that happen every year. So the General Lay Convocation happened in 2021. General Conference ended, the Lay Convocation started that afternoon. The next time the lay meet in a general meeting is 2025. This year, the General Christian Education Convention meets in, is this one virtually?
Virtual.
This one's virtually. 2026, hopefully it'll be in person again. When I was a kid, it used to meet on Livingstone's campus, no matter what. That's where the General Education, Christian Education meeting went, which makes sense. You have a university, you have a four-year institution that you can use during the summer. Why not? Livingstone is in Salisbury, North Carolina. So it was a way to bring people to see the school, especially our young people who are in the age of going to college or younger. They got to see the school.
Did those someone to see when you went?
How?
That's what there was someone to see when you went.
Yes, stop it. The General Missionary Convention meets in 2023 and in 2027 after that. One year, 1987, the General Convention came to Boston. Then Reverend Dr. Warren Brown got it brought to Boston, and my sister was one. That's how I remember it. And the General Conference next meeting is 2024 and then 2028. We took the 2020 meeting and pushed it to 2021. There are 12 Episcopal districts. The Piedmont District, which is really western North Carolina, eastern North Carolina, the Midwest, Northeastern, South Atlantic, Mid-Atlantic, Alabama, Florida, Southwestern Delta, the Western, Central, Southern Africa, Western West Africa, and Eastern West Africa. The last two African Episcopal districts have residential bishops. What does that mean? That means they're indigenous bishops, excuse me. That means that the two men who are over that work are from there. So Western West Africa is Ghana, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire. The bishop over that work is from Ghana. That means he doesn't have to fly. We used to bring bishops from America, have to fly over to Africa either every quarter or once, twice, however they worked it out. Eastern West Africa, which is really Nigeria, and Nigeria alone, really, is presided over by an indigenous Nigerian now. Again, you eliminate the travel. Bishop Eckerman was the first Nigerian elected, and that's when they split Africa up. It used to just be one work, but that's when they split it up. And it makes it easier financially because you not have to worry about somebody traveling. You spend, I went with Bishop Brown to Ghana on one trip. We flew from Boston to Amsterdam, so that's 6-7 hours. Flew from Amsterdam to Ghana, that's another. So that's what, 13, 14 hours just in the air. I'm not talking about the 5, 6, 7 hours in the airport. You basically spending a day going from here to there. If you have an indigenous bishop, they're not doing it. They go in a couple of hours. One of the reasons we push for residential bishops even here in the States and want them to live in the area is that if you're in the work, you don't have to travel as far. People don't have to wait for you. You can also impact public policy because you're there. So the bishop over the Texas work, even though he's still in Chicago, he's close enough where he can get to Texas. So it is important. A couple of the Episcopal areas actually have their bishops living in the area. A lot of them, they're close.
Well, we need a bishop.
Our last one had moved that way and had bought property in, but it didn't. It became a bigger mess. But the bishop does need to be in the area, and it's recommended. It's not a requirement because of the economics behind it. We're talking about you need to buy a home in places that are rather expensive. buying a home in California, I don't know if we all know this, but buying a home in California is not something you can do with $20,000 anymore. So you're talking at least $1 million, $1.5 million. Where the money coming from? New England, the house that Bishop Proctor is in right now is a multi-million-dollar home. It's located in the middle of Connecticut. But you got New York and New Jersey and New England pouring into it and paying and keeping it up. So it's an expense, but it's a necessary one that the areas have to work out and figure out. All right, questions, and then we're going to call it a night. 1, a members' meeting can be called by the pastor. Good. The presiding elder presides over the annual conference and general conference? No. C, quarterly conference and district conference. General conference happens A, once every 4 years, B, every 6 months, only when called, or once a year. The answer is A. Where does a pastor report on the work for the time frame? In other words, if it's a quarter, if it's a year, wherever. Where does the pastor report? Does he report at the annual conference, the district conference, or the quarterly conference, or D, all of the above? Bishops are elected at the members' meeting, district conference, general conference, or the board of bishops meeting. C, general conference. And you're only elected if there's an opening. We don't elect just to say we elected a bishop. So, again, and it's odd and awkward that it's happened this way. But with the passing of Bishop Hines, we know that there's an opening. Bishop Monroe is slated to retire at the 24th District Conference, so that means there'll be potentially 2 openings. From what I know, I don't think anybody else is at retirement age, and it's the birthday closest to your 72nd. And she would have been 69 going into that general conference, so she could have potentially argued she could get another quadrennial, because 68, they would let you go to 72. So she may have been able to argue that, but God saw fit. All right, that's the best slide in the show. We're going to end it for the night right here, and we will pick up next week. Next week we'll talk about...
No, week after.
Oh, you don't want to do next week?
Thursday,
Okay.
Thursday, the evening conference.
All right, good. So Pastor said the 8th of June, he's gonna get himself ready for annual conference. So we will talk about lay officers and lay roles next week. All right. Thank you so much. Father, bless us as we prepare to depart from this place, but never from your presence. We ask, oh Lord, that you give us safe travel home. You give us peace and order when we get there, and allow us to rest and start the next day in your care. Continue to bless those who have lost loved ones over the month. Bless the Amy Zion Church as it grieves not only the sister in Buffalo, but its bishop. Bless those families in Texas that mourn the loss of their children. Keep us in your care. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.